Marella Oyst and Lenox Craive vanished the same night. Two bodies were found inside the Vellon family home, one hidden beneath a tarp, the other sprawled at the bottom of the stairs, and what looked like a tragic household accident quickly unraveled into one of the most calculated and chilling double murders the town had ever seen. Neriah Vellon stood at the edge of what many would call a dream life. At just 34, she had carved out a successful career as an interior designer, building a client list filled with influencers and executives. Her social media page was a gallery of elegance, flawless living rooms, serene color palettes, and photos of her with her husband, Dracen, smiling in candlelit kitchens or lounging in luxurious vacation spots. But in real life, things weren't as perfect as the pictures suggested. The Vellons had recently moved into their new home in Pine Grove Hills, a quiet, upscale neighborhood surrounded by manicured lawns and tall pines. The house itself was a modern marvel, complete with floor-to-ceiling windows, heated floors, a private garden, and a full security system with interior and exterior surveillance. It was Neriah's dream project, a home she designed from the ground up, every finish, every fixture, every last detail. Yet behind the smooth plaster walls and elegant glass panels, something dark was festering. Dracen Vellon was a rising name in the tech consulting world. Smart, strategic, but emotionally distant, he was known to his colleagues as efficient but robotic. At home, that coldness took on a sharper edge. Neighbors noted the tension between the couple. Late at night, muffled arguments often echoed from behind their closed doors. Sometimes Neriah would be seen pacing the backyard barefoot, staring into the woods. Once, the woman next door saw her flinch when Dracen placed a hand on her shoulder during a neighborhood barbecue. Still, no one ever called the police. They were the Vellons, successful, beautiful, untouchable. Then came the morning of October 11th. It was just after 7 a.m. when a food delivery driver found the front door of the Vellon home slightly ajar. Curious and concerned, he knocked. No answer. He stepped in and was met with a stillness that made the hairs on his neck rise. Lying at the foot of the grand staircase was Neriah, her lifeless body twisted unnaturally. Her neck was clearly broken. Her arms were bruised and there was blood beneath her fingernails. The initial investigation leaned toward an accident. The staircase was long and steep, polished wood with no handrail on one side. Maybe she slipped. Maybe she had an episode. There were no signs of forced entry, no struggle that would suggest foul play. The smart security system had stopped recording at midnight. The backup server had also failed. It was all too clean. Detective Elan Rhys was assigned to the case. Methodical and composed, he had handled dozens of domestic deaths, many with strange circumstances. Something about this scene unsettled him. Accidental falls had a certain chaos to them. This didn't look chaotic. It looked precise, controlled, almost theatrical. The staircase was spotless. The landing around Neriah's body was untouched, as if someone had carefully arranged it all. While canvassing the neighborhood, Rhys spoke with a woman living across the street who reported something strange. Around 2:15 a.m., she had woken up to use the bathroom and heard what she described as a male scream, sharp and panicked, followed by total silence. She hadn't thought much of it at the time. No other neighbors reported the sound, but it was enough to cast doubt on the accident theory. The autopsy returned troubling results. Neriah had injuries inconsistent with a fall, small bruises on her wrists, as if she had been grabbed tightly, and a faint chemical trace in her system resembling a common sedative. It wasn't enough to knock her out, but enough to slow her. Reflexes. Dracen, strangely, was nowhere to be found. His phone was off, and he hadn't shown up to work or responded to emails in days. The press got wind of the case, and speculation spread quickly. Some blamed Dracen, others suspected an affair gone wrong. But one thing became certain. This was no ordinary household accident. Something terrible had happened inside that house, and someone had gone to great lengths to make sure it looked like nothing at all. Detective Elan Rhys returned to the Vellon residence the following day with a growing sense that the case was far from over. The pieces didn't fit together. The broken security system, the trace of sedatives, the bruises. It all suggested something had been carefully staged. If Neriah had been drugged and then died in a fall, someone had helped her down those stairs. That person was either very familiar with the house or had access to it in a way that wouldn't raise suspicion. The first step was to review the list of people who had recently been inside the home. There were few. Neriah was selective about who entered her space, especially since the renovations were completed. But one name stood out: Lenox Craive, a local handyman who had worked on a custom shelving unit in the basement just a week before the incident. Lenox had been hired by Dracen through a small local agency and had no major complaints on record, though his background showed a complicated history. Lenox Craive was in his mid-40s, a quiet man who lived in a rented cabin on the edge of town. He was a war veteran with a past marked by trauma and a few minor brushes with the law, mostly bar fights and unpaid fines. When Rhys interviewed him, Lenox was polite but reserved. He admitted he had been in the Vellon home several times, finishing some late-night work in the basement. He claimed the last time he saw Neriah, she had offered him tea and complimented his precision. He said he packed up his tools and left before midnight. But Rhys wasn't satisfied. There was something about Lennox's demeanor that felt guarded, like he was holding something back. A search of Lennox's workshop revealed nothing immediately incriminating. No signs of stolen items or bloodied clothing, but something about the Vellon basement had been nagging at Rhys since the autopsy results. He decided to revisit it with a forensic team. The basement was unusually designed. Neriah had wanted it to serve both as a workspace and a storage area, with sleek built-in cabinets along the walls. One of the cabinets didn't sit quite right. The hinges were tighter than the others, and the paneling seemed slightly off. When pried open, it revealed more than just paint cans and old tools. Behind the false wall was a small crawl space, barely large enough to fit a person, but someone had clearly been inside. Inside the cramped space was a discarded work glove, smudged, with what appeared to be dried blood, a bottle of an over-the-counter sedative and something else, a set of printed photos. They were pictures of Neriah, some taken from strange angles and distances, as if someone had been watching her without her knowing. One photo showed her asleep on the living room couch. Another showed her gardening alone, unaware she was being photographed. The discovery shifted the investigation into darker territory. Who had taken the photos? Was it Lenox? If so, why hide them in the basement? Rhys couldn't rule him out, but he also couldn't ignore the possibility that someone else had planted the evidence there. The blood on the glove was sent for testing, and the photos were dusted for fingerprints. In the meantime, the question of Dracen Vellon's whereabouts grew more urgent. He hadn't been heard from in nearly 2 weeks. His phone remained off. No credit cards had been used. Yet, according to bank records, someone had accessed his joint account with Neriah just 2 days after her death and transferred a significant sum of money to an unregistered offshore account. The transaction was masked well, almost expertly. Someone who understood the digital trail had made sure to cover it. Rhys began to suspect that Dracen might not be missing. He could be dead. Or he could be hiding, having orchestrated everything. Either way, the Vellon home had become a central piece in a much larger puzzle. It was no longer a question of how Neriah died. It was now a question of why, and who had the most to gain from it. Rhys ordered a deeper forensic sweep of the property, including the garden, the attic, and the outdoor shed. He also requested a subpoena for the Vellon's cloud security backups. Somewhere in that sleek, modern home was a secret no one had yet uncovered, and the truth, he feared, would be worse than anyone imagined. The forensic team returned to the Vellon home with a specialized canine unit trained to detect human remains. Detective Elan Rhys watched closely as the dogs circled the perimeter of the backyard, pausing near the edge of the property where a large wooden shed stood beneath a canopy of trees. The shed had been locked from the outside with a heavy bolt. At first glance, it seemed like simple storage: tools, gardening supplies, maybe seasonal decorations. But when the door was finally forced open, a sickening odor confirmed what Rhys had feared. Inside, covered by a tarp and partially decomposed, lay the body of Dracen Vellon. His face was bruised, and there were puncture wounds in his chest. Blood had pooled beneath him and seeped into the wooden floor. He had been dead for much longer than Neriah, at least 2 weeks according to the medical examiner's initial observation. His body showed signs of a struggle, including defensive wounds on his hands. He hadn't died peacefully. He had fought for his life. The entire investigation shifted again. Neriah had been killed days after her husband. The timeline was completely out of order. The theory that Dracen had murdered Neriah now fell apart. Instead, it appeared that someone had killed Dracen first and then Neriah later, possibly to silence her. But who had reason to kill both? And why go through the effort of staging Neriah's death to look like an accident? Back inside the house, Rhys reviewed security footage again. Although the main recording was missing an hour, forensic technicians managed to recover fragments from the backup cloud data. The footage didn't capture the moment of Neriah's death, but it did reveal something curious. A figure entering the house at 1:13 a.m., long after Neriah was believed to have gone to bed. The person wore a hood and gloves, moved carefully, and appeared to know exactly where the cameras were. Moments before the footage cut out, the figure reached up and disabled the hallway camera manually. This was no random intruder. Whoever it was had knowledge of the house layout and the security system. It was someone who had been inside before. Someone familiar. Meanwhile, toxicology reports for Dracen revealed that he had been drugged with the same sedative found in Neriah's system. The doses were far higher in his case, enough to weaken him before the fatal attack. The murder weapon was confirmed to be a flathead screwdriver, and a similar tool was missing from Lenox Craive's set, which had been logged in during his last work assignment at the Vellon home. The match wasn't perfect, but it was close enough to draw suspicion. Rhys returned to Lennox's cabin to question him again, but this time Lenox wasn't there. The place was deserted. His truck was parked outside, but inside there were signs of a rushed departure. A pot still on the stove, an unmade bed, and drawers pulled open. A notepad on the kitchen table had scribbles, mostly to-do lists, but at the bottom of the last page, 4 words were circled. She said it's justice. The phrase made little sense on its own. Who was she? And what kind of justice did she mean? As the investigation deepened, Rhys began to look into the Vellon's financial records, their insurance policies, and communication history. That's when he discovered that someone had accessed their joint investment account 3 days after Dracen's death, long before Neriah's murder. The funds had been split, and a portion was wired to an offshore account that had recently been linked to a third party, Marella Oyst, Neriah's younger sister. Marella had always been a quiet background figure. She rarely appeared in family photos and maintained a modest lifestyle as a part-time librarian in a neighboring town. She was supposedly in town for a short visit, helping Neriah with a design project. She had been seen just days before the murders, staying at a short-term rental nearby. No one suspected her. Until now. What had started as a domestic tragedy was unraveling into something far more chilling, a layered crime, carefully planned and cruelly executed. 2 bodies, 1 missing handyman, and a sister who stood to gain everything. Rhys knew. The real storm was just beginning. Detective Elan Rhys now found himself tracing the movements of Marella Oyst, the quiet, reclusive younger sister of Neriah Vellon. Her involvement in the financial transfers following Dracen's death had shifted her from a peripheral figure to a central suspect. Publicly, Marella had portrayed herself as supportive, just a grieving sister helping with funeral arrangements. But behind the scenes, she had been making calculated moves, and Rhys suspected she had been manipulating events long before the murders occurred. Marella's rental cottage, located just 15 minutes from the Vellon home, had already been vacated. Her booking had ended 2 days after Neriah's funeral. Inside, forensic officers found a few personal items left behind: clothing, makeup, receipts. But one item stood out: a discarded disposable phone hidden in the trash beneath a layer of coffee grounds. The phone's data, recovered by the cyber team, revealed a string of encrypted messages sent to a contact listed only as L. The language was cryptic, filled with phrases like, "Everything's in motion," and "She doesn't suspect," followed by the final chilling text, "Both are done. I'll disappear next." The L in question couldn't be a coincidence. Rhys was now convinced the messages had been sent to Lenox Craive, the handyman who had vanished after being questioned. A deeper dive into Lenox's financial history revealed several large cash deposits over the previous 2 months, far more than what he would have earned from occasional home repair jobs. The deposits were traced back to an account opened in Marella's name under a false business license, making it look like Lenox had been hired as a subcontractor. It became clear that Marella and Lenox were working together, but the motivation behind the murders remained a mystery. Rhys knew money was part of it. The joint investment fund had been raided, and the insurance policy on Dracen's life, valued at nearly $1.5 million, listed Neriah as the primary beneficiary, with Marella as the secondary. If Neriah died, Marella would inherit everything. Digging into Marella's past revealed a much more troubled picture than anyone had known. She had been in and out of psychiatric care during her 20s. Old records mentioned feelings of abandonment and deep resentment toward Neriah, who had always overshadowed her in school, family gatherings, and later, in career success. Marella's social media was almost non-existent, but her journal entries, recovered from an old laptop found in her abandoned rental, told a different story. In those digital pages, Marella wrote about being erased, always the second choice, living in a world where Neriah's smile covered up years of cruelty. There was no direct mention of murder, but the tone was increasingly unhinged. She wrote about plans to reset the scales and build a world where she wasn't in the way. The final entry simply read, "I need to finish what we started." He wasn't enough. The phrase struck Rhys like a thunderclap. Dracen's death had been the beginning. Neriah wasn't just collateral damage, she was the goal. Marella's plan had always been about her sister. Dracen had simply been the first obstacle. A break came when surveillance footage from a gas station outside the county captured a woman resembling Marella entering a small silver sedan registered under a false name. The footage was time-stamped 48 hours after Neriah's death. She was alone. The vehicle was later found abandoned in a rest stop near a wooded nature reserve on the edge of state lines. No sign of Marella, no fingerprints, only a bottle of water and a note that read, "Gone is peace. Justice remains." Rhys issued a nationwide alert, naming Marella Oyst and Lenox Craive as persons of interest in a double homicide. Their photos were circulated to media outlets, bus stations, airports, and border checkpoints. Yet both seemed to have vanished without a trace. What disturbed Rhys most was not their disappearance, but the eerie sense of satisfaction in Marella's final trail of breadcrumbs. As if this was all a performance, a carefully written ending, to a chapter she had long ago imagined. With no arrests made and no confessions, the case remained open, haunted by the possibility that Marella had planned everything with such precision she never expected to get caught, because she never intended to be found. The weeks that followed were filled with dead ends and growing unease. Despite national coverage and a reward offered for information, neither Marella Oyst nor Lenox Craive surfaced. Detective Elan Rhys spent every day re-examining the evidence, hunting for the one detail that might crack the case wide open. Yet, with every piece he studied, he became more convinced that what he was dealing with wasn't a spur-of-the-moment crime, but a long-planned orchestration executed by someone who had thought of nearly everything. Meanwhile, forensic analysts delivered the final results on the blood found inside the hidden basement crawlspace. It belonged to Dracen Vellon. This meant his murder hadn't occurred in the shed, where his body had been found. It happened in the house. He had bled in the basement, possibly ambushed and drugged, then transported after death. The crawlspace wasn't just a hiding spot for disturbing trophies. It had been used as a temporary holding area, a chilling pause between life and death. Investigators also confirmed that fingerprints found on the sedative bottle matched Marella. Though this wasn't enough to convict her in absentia, it tied her even closer to the scene of the crime. Yet the most damning piece came from a completely unexpected source. An anonymous envelope arrived at the precinct, addressed to Rhys himself. It contained a flash drive with no return address. On the drive was a series of video clips, filmed on a phone, shaky and dark. The first video showed Dracen, tied to a chair in the basement, bruised and unconscious. The second showed Neriah pacing, her hands trembling, whispering words that couldn't be made out clearly, but her distress was unmistakable. The third video, only a few seconds long, was the most harrowing. It showed Marella standing over her sister at the top of the staircase, her hands coated in something dark, looking down as Neriah's body lay motionless at the bottom of the stairs. There was no audio, only silent footage. But it told a complete story. The videos appeared to have been recorded secretly, by Lenox, most likely. Whether as leverage against Marella or as a way to preserve evidence for his own insurance, no one could say. But the clips confirmed that both victims had been held and manipulated before their deaths. Marella hadn't just wanted them gone. She wanted them to suffer. A forensic team scoured the video metadata and traced the files to a hidden folder on a secure cloud drive registered under a pseudonym connected to Lenox's known online activity. It proved he was still alive and monitoring the investigation. That he had sent the flash drive voluntarily meant only one thing. The alliance between Marella and Lenox had fractured. Perhaps he feared being the next target. The task force now had a new direction. Focus shifted to digital tracking, monitoring dark web forums, encrypted message boards, and cryptocurrency transactions tied to Lenox's alias. In a post buried deep within a hidden forum, an account matching Lenox's digital footprint left a chilling message. "When she comes for me, I'll be ready. I still have the last recording." He was running, hiding, but he hadn't given up control. Marella had thought she was the architect, but Lenox had kept a final card. And whatever that recording was, it had the potential to end everything. Detective Rhys coordinated with cybercrime units to isolate the forum IPs, hoping to trace Lenox's location. It worked, partially. A digital signature led them to a remote town in the Pacific Northwest. An abandoned hunting cabin showed signs of recent occupation, burned logs in the fireplace, canned food, and surveillance equipment. But Lenox was gone. Only a USB stick was left behind, placed deliberately on a table. Back at the lab, the stick was decrypted. On it was a full-length video, 27 minutes long, showing the planning stages of the murders, including Marella, laying out the sequence of events, rehearsing what she would say if questioned, and expressing a twisted satisfaction at the thought of starting fresh, without anyone in her way. It was the final proof Rhys had been waiting for. Now Marella was no longer just a suspect. She was a confirmed killer, recorded by her own partner in crime, but she was still free, and the hunt was far from over.